Hi everyone, my name's Sharon Sha. I'm a neurologist, specifically a behavioral neurologist, and I specialize in memory disorders. I am here to answer some questions for you guys today. So thanks for joining me. Hi everyone. This is my first time doing Instagram, and maybe I'll become an addict and do it for real forever. So I have some questions, and feel free to put some in the comments, and I'll answer them to the best of my knowledge. So first one I have here is there a connection between depression and Alzheimer's disease? So just for background, I spend pretty much all of the time that I am in clinic seeing patients with Alzheimer's disease. So I would say the majority of my patients have depression or anxiety or irritability in addition to their Alzheimer's disease. We don't fully understand why that occurs. So, for example, sometimes people who have depression or anxiety can happen, those symptoms can happen before the memory problems even happen, which is strange. So we wonder if there's some sort of prodrome or correlation between the mood disorder and the disease. But it doesn't always happen before the memory disorder. Sometimes it happens at the same time. Sometimes it happens after. And so whenever I hear about someone who has a new onset depression, irritability, anxiety, or any of these sort of mood disorders that occurs later in life. So typical age of onset for these disorders are in your 20s. So if it happens later in life, it makes me wonder, is there a degenerative disease component to this? And I wonder if potentially what's ever happening in the brain that's causing the memory not to work and the neurons to get damaged and die, if our resilience to mood changes also changes. So I often recommend either myself or the primary care physician who takes care of that person to think about a medication or treatment or therapy or things to help improve mood. Because the other thing that occurs with depression and Alzheimer's having both there, that the depression can also cause a cognitive problem or exacerbate a cognitive problem. So you can imagine if you're worried about something like COVID and the risk of developing COVID in this pandemic, we've got this something thinking in the back of our mind that's keeping us distracted from answering the emails or responding quickly or even thinking clearly, that oftentimes that causes a poor learning of material, retention of material, and things like that. So I think it's important to treat these mood disorders and not just say, oh, it's due to the Alzheimer's disease, etc. So I hope that answered the question. I love seeing everybody's waves and joining. Let's see. I have another question. This woman says, I have type 2 diabetes. Does this mean I might have a higher susceptibility to Alzheimer's disease? So it's a fantastic question. Diabetes, in addition to high blood pressure, high cholesterol, history of smoking, these are all what we call vascular risk factors. So vascular risk factors meaning that it increases the risk of heart attack and stroke. And so that's why we treat those. So even though having high blood pressure in and of itself doesn't necessarily mean that you will have a stroke or you will have a heart attack, it can increase the risk for it. So we've learned through research that having these vascular risk factors can increase the risk of dementia, specifically Alzheimer's disease. So, and is it because of the increased risk of stroke and little strokes building up over time in your brain that you may not be aware of? That's a possibility. But in and of itself, does it increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease? That's a possibility too. So does that mean, oh, I have a diagnosis of diabetes, now I'm going to get Alzheimer's disease? No, I don't think that's the case either. I really believe that your destiny is what you make it to. There might be some genetic predispositions or other medical problems that can play a role in developing further diseases. So for example, if you have diabetes, you might have risk for developing peripheral neuropathy. Doesn't mean you will if we can keep it in good control. So I think if you have diabetes, yes, it increases the risk, but if we treat it well and exercise, maybe you can reduce that risk to back to normal. So I like that. Okay, I hope that answered the question. And I like seeing the waves. Thank you. All right, another question. How has COVID affected clinical trials for Alzheimer's? And do you anticipate a setback in research goals? So one of the other hats that I wear besides seeing patients is running clinical trials and doing research for Alzheimer's disease and other related disorders. And so due to COVID and the pandemic, I don't want my patients to come in and develop a risk of getting COVID just by coming to see me. I've run most of my clinics virtually like this. But yes, research has been on hold, so there's an added risk. Just participating in research, sometimes there's certain risks in whatever the drug we give them if it's a clinical trial. So let me just step back for a moment and say, what is research? Research is trying to understand a question. And so a lot of my research has to do with clinical trials. And that usually means that we have a drug or some intervention that we hope will change Alzheimer's disease, make it better, slow it down, maybe make symptoms better. And so having a drug that is unproven, not FDA approved, might give you a risk for certain conditions, whatever the drug does, maybe some stomach upset or something like that. So we want to make sure that everybody knows the risks and benefits by participating. So by coming in and participating in research during this pandemic, that's extra risk. And so especially with patients who have Alzheimer's disease, those patients tend to be older. We want to make sure that we don't give them extra risk and vulnerability. So yes, COVID has affected our research. We've put a lot of it on hold. But, I think with certain parts of the country opening up again and having a lot more safety measures, we can continue research. And although it's disappointing that we might lose some of the data because people have missed maybe certain doses of their medications and they're not participating as much because they're more concerned about going out in public. And I totally get that. I think COVID has made us innovative, right? So we're doing these kinds of things. I'm now Instagramming, if it's a verb. We're also doing a lot more remote assessments and virtual assessments and doing all sorts of things that we didn't used to think was possible. So I hope that I'll be able to continue after the pandemic is over, and that research will still be alive and thriving. I just saw a research patient today, and I'm going to see another one later today. So we've made it more safe for people to come in, and we're testing people. So I think that's really exciting to continue. So hopefully funding will still be there. People will still be motivated, and I am definitely motivated. Okay. So let's see, what's next? How does an increase of screen time and blue light affect the brain? So thanks for that question, because I didn't really know the answer to that question. And so what do I do when I don't know the answer? And I love when people ask me questions because it makes me look it up. And so when someone else asks me a question, I then know the answer and I seem smart. So I looked it up, and I already know that sleep can affect Alzheimer's disease, can affect cognition. So any one of us who are moms and didn't sleep, so I'm a mom of 2 kids, and I didn't sleep a lot. I still don't sleep a lot. So that can affect my thinking the next day, right? When we're sleep deprived, and also in my residency training, I'm sleep deprived. How can I remember all the things I have to do? We're sort of distracted. So we know sleep affects our brain. And we also know that sleep can affect our brain in so many different ways. Usually it's this multitasking, attention, concentration part of our brain, what we call executive function. And that can affect memory too. So if we never learn the material because we're not concentrating, we can't remember it later, of course. But we've also learned that besides just poor sleep that affects cognition, poor sleep can actually affect our risk of developing things like Alzheimer's disease. And how does that work? Well, small sort of studies using mouse models and humans, when we've studied them and looked at people who slept more versus who slept less, there's less buildup of this bad amyloid protein in the brain in people who sleep more. So there's something to be said that, not only do we feel the effects when we don't sleep well, we also may be doing something actually for our brain, whether we sleep better or worse. So then getting back to the question, how does blue light affect the brain? We know that blue light and just more screen time and light in general can suppress our circadian rhythms. And how do we do that? Well, when the light hits our brain or our eyes, it sends signals to our brain to suppress melatonin. You may be aware of melatonin as something we take when we are traveling and we have jet lag and we want to make sure we can sleep better. So with the light, whether it's blue light or screen light or regular daylight, that suppresses melatonin. So we say it's time to be awake. But if we have it too late at night, then it's going to affect our sleep-wake and our circadian rhythms. So that can affect just sleeping habits in general and potentially cognition. So when I was looking this up in preparation for this, I also saw research studies where people who've had traumatic brain injury or night shift workers who already have, problems with either cognition or problems with their sleep-wake cycle, when they've given them blue light in the early morning to help regulate a sleep-wake cycle, it actually improved cognition a little bit. So I would say let's avoid it. Now I have to watch less TV at night because that's my favorite thing to do right before bed. We have to avoid it late at night. And just what you've read, in the internet, we shouldn't have too much or try to alter the screen time. Maybe read a real book or something like that. Okay, I hope that answers that question. What's next? And again, write some questions down if you have any, and I'll try to get to them. What is the best and easiest thing we can all do for our brains if you could only recommend one thing? So that's an easy question for me. I really believe that the data that's coming out, the research, is really supporting exercise. So I'm going to tell you a secret. As I saw more and more research supporting how exercise helps our brain health, either slowing progression in people who already have memory problems or delaying sort of a prevention mechanism to prevent developing things like Alzheimer's disease and dementia. I thought maybe could I do this for myself? I have 2 young kids and the kids were even younger, so I wasn't sleeping well, I wasn't making time for myself, I wasn't exercising regularly. And believe it or not, I was on a Division I collegiate rowing team in college. I was a coxswain. But I was exercising a lot, and then life happened and I wasn't exercising regularly. So I changed my password, my computer passwords, to exercise more. Don't worry, I have some numbers in there. And that subliminally also made me think about exercising more. And I started putting it into my calendar to exercise every day. And this is also what I was telling my patients, and I couldn't tell my patients to exercise and not do it myself. And why do I believe in it so much? We know that when we exercise, we feel good. Those endorphins are released and we feel happier, even though you may not want to do it. There's that inertia. But there's something to be said that when we exercise, that might help our brain function better, our memory function better. There's an old study from 2011 looking at 165 older adults who had no memory problems. And the researchers took 2 groups, one that exercised like on a treadmill and one that did stretching. And after a year, the researchers measured their memory centers of the brain, the hippocampus, that looks like this. That's why I'm doing that. And after a year, the stretching group lost 1% of the size of their hippocampus. And that's normal aging. And the exercise group gained 1% in the size of their hippocampus. So that was super exciting, but they also improved on memory scores. So more and more data supporting this kind of evidence where exercise enhances brain function or keeps the brain healthier, and people who have cognitive impairment like dementias, maybe exercise delays progression too. We don't know how it works. If we did, we would bottle it, take a pill, and we'd be rich, whoever discovered that. And because we don't, that's why we say we have to do that. Some researchers think something called BDNF, brain-derived nerve growth factor, is something that stimulated, and maybe that's what's enhancing the neuronal connections, the brain talking to each other. So I really believe in it, and people ask me what kind of exercise is helpful. And so I don't think you have to do that treadmill. In fact, I don't like the treadmill because I like being outside, and I can never really tell, am I going too fast on this conveyor belt? So I really like, recommending things that gets your heart rate up. Like right now, my heart rate's up. But that you breathe a little bit harder, because that's when the endorphins are released. And maybe that's when that BDNF or something else helps our brain function. So people say, can I walk? And I would say, sure, make sure you walk, but walk fast enough that you do that. And make it part of your daily routine, because if you say, I'm going to do it every other day, which is what I said, every other day turns into another day and another day, and it never really happens. So if you make it part of your routine, like brushing your teeth, you just know it's going to happen, and then you'll feel good. All right, let's see. Do elevated stress hormones throughout life increase your risk for Alzheimer's disease later on? So the problem with stress hormones is that we don't often measure them. So we don't really say, okay, I'm going to measure my stress hormones right now. I knew at age 20 it was high, and at age 50 it was low, or whichever. But I would say that stress in general can have an effect on our cognition, right? Stress in general can make you feel bad. It's not sleep well. And we already talked about how important sleep is. Elevated stress can affect your diet too, right? We didn't talk about diet, but there's so much more data coming out how important a good, healthy diet is too. So I can't say for a fact that stress hormones specifically increases your risk for Alzheimer's disease, but I think that stress in general could probably increase your risk because of all of those extraneous factors, right? If we're stressed out, we're not going to eat well. Maybe we're munching on chocolate and cookies at night like I am when COVID first happened, and sometimes still. And we're not sleeping well, we're not eating well, we're not doing the things that we want to do that we know are good for our brain, like the exercise, cognitive stimulation, the socializing, all of that. So I would say that it would increase your risk for Alzheimer's disease. So what can you do is remove the stress. Oh, that's so easy to say. But things like exercise can help reduce stress, make you feel better, get those endorphins released. And sometimes you can't change the situation, whatever's going on in your life, but you can deal with it. But also you could seek help. Talk to your doctor, talk to your psychiatrist, talk to a therapist, talk to a friend. Reaching out now has become easier because we have things like Instagram. And I like making it a verb that we are gramming right now. Now I'm just showing my age. Okay. I'm going to say hello to some people, some waves. Hello. Okay. And here's another question. I only have a couple minutes left. What is the correlation between concussions in early life and dementia? So that's a really great question. I think we hear that a lot in the media now about football players who have concussions or just concussions in general. We do know that concussions can increase the risk of developing dementias. We just don't know how much. Like, how many do you need to have? Do I need to have 5? And at what age? We just don't know that data. What you hear about in the media with football and CTE stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy. CTE is a specific disorder that's really only defined after death. So the pathologist has to look under a microscope and say, I see these tau proteins and it's in this pattern. It looks like CTE. So during life, it's really hard to make that diagnosis. It's hard. Sometimes it looks a lot like Alzheimer's disease. Sometimes there's specific criteria that we see, the more rage attacks and emotional behaviors. We just don't fully understand it enough. But we do know that head trauma, like concussions, things like that, can increase the risk for developing Alzheimer's disease, CTE, and other dementias. How that works, we don't really know. My suspicion is that some people might be on their way to developing something like Alzheimer's disease. We know that the proteins that develop in Alzheimer's disease can start to deposit 15 to 20 years before we have memory problems. I didn't say that earlier. That's also why I exercise. So now is the time. It's never too late to start exercising. But if concussions are occurring, maybe that's stimulating more of these bad proteins to start depositing earlier. And then that's why we're getting that increased risk for dementias. Okay. I think that's all my time. So thanks for submitting questions. Thanks for joining me today. This was really fun. And I really hope that you guys go out and exercise. I'm going to make my time to exercise today. And doing this made me think, so that's good for my brain. So I didn't say the things that I recommend. Exercise, socializing, cognitive stimulation like this, eating healthy, what kind of foods? No one asked me that. Usually the data demonstrating Mediterranean foods, heart-healthy foods. There's no one thing, right? So not one type of exercise, not one type of cognitive thing like crosswords. You just want a good balanced life. All right. Thank you guys for joining me. Have a great day. Bye.